To get started on this book exercise, you should have downloaded the Graph Editor folder, and inside of it you can find the After Effects file for the slideshow swipe start. Double-click on this and let's fire it up and go into After Effects. Once it's open, be sure you double-click on the swipe composition so that we're working inside of that comp. It gives you all of the layers for the cursor, the phone, the screens, and even the green background. The first thing we want to do is to animate one of these backgrounds. Let's go down to the screen layer and set your current time indicator to 1 second. Let's press the P key on the keyboard to open the position, and since we're at 1 second, let's click the stopwatch to add a starting keyframe. From here, move your current time indicator forward 10 more frames, and let's set the position value to be 5:11 with 3:41.5 still being the same. This will move it directly over and place it nice and in the middle of your screen. Now that we have this animating one way, let's animate it going the opposite way. Here's a great trick to know to how to quickly swap up an animation. We're going to select both of our keyframes on our keyframe timeline. We can go up to Edit and down to Copy. And then from here, let's move forward to the 2 second mark. So putting our current time indicator at 2 seconds. With that layer still selected, we can go up to Edit and Paste, and this will paste both of those positions back onto there as well. The problem is, we obviously need to reverse out those. So with both of these keyframes still selected, let's go up to Animation, down to Keyframe Assistant, and tell it to reverse the time on the keyframes. Now when you go to play it, it'll move forward, pause, and then move back. Now let's control the easing of both of these movements to make them seem a little bit more natural. And we're not just going to use simple easy ease. We're going to open up the Graph Editor by going down to our timeline and selecting all 4 of our keyframes. With all 4 selected, at the top left-hand side, or excuse me, the right-hand side of the left-hand side of your timeline, you can find the icon for the Graph Editor. When you open this up, this will graph off on a timeline where the position is. And you can view this timeline a couple of different ways. Now this particular graph is actually showing the speed at which everything is moving. So you can see when things are at rest, they're all the way down here. When they begin to move, they move this fast and then immediately stop, and then move again and then stop. If you go down to the very bottom center of your Graph Editor, you can find a variety of different buttons. One of the most important ones is the second one that lets you choose the different kinds of graphs that you can pull up. Make sure you've got the Speed Graph Editor checked on. Now if we were to click on the word position, you can see how this will highlight all of the points on this graph. And if we wanted to add easy ease to the movement of it, down at the very bottom far right side is the different kinds of easing. This first option will allow you to add easy ease, and now you can see it goes from resting to easing in to movement and easing out, and then resting again, and then easing in and easing out. So this is a great way to be able to visualize the movement and the speed at which everything is being done. Since this is a vector graph, we can also edit these graphs. If we click away an empty area to deselect these, this will allow you to click on one of the handles and then be able to drag it to adjust the rate at which it's moving. So in this case, you can see how it's going to slowly and then quickly move up and then quickly stop. So I'm going to select this first one and then move the handle to the right. Then I'm going to select this last one and move the handle to the left. So it'll give you kind of this double mountain peak. If we back up and play our animation now, you can see how it quickly and more naturally moves in. Once this is done, we can hit the Graph Editor one more time to go back to our normal editor. Now we can close up the screens layer and let's select our cursor layer. Let's animate this cursor coming to life. In order to do this, with the cursor layer selected, press the S key and also Shift T to open up the opacity options as well. We're going to set our current time indicator to frame number 15, And let's check on the scale and the opacity stopwatch to add some keyframes to it. We're going to start by having our scale set down to 0 and our opacity also set down to 0. Next, to make it show up, we're going to move all the way over to frame 20. Let's overshoot the scale of our little icon by 120% for both values. Let's have the opacity come up to 100%. Then let's go forward 5 more frames to the 25th keyframe, and let's bring the scale back down to 100%. As with everything, we can select all of our keyframes. Let's do F9 to quickly add easy ease to all of those keyframes. With this done, let's also pull our current time indicator to 1 second. Let's do Shift P to open up the position value. And we're going to click the stopwatch at 1 second to start our animation from here. But let's move the position over to 640 by 320. So what we're wanting to animate is to have the button be pressed, and then as soon as it's pressed, it's going to lower its opacity. So to do this, let's go down to our timeline, and I'm going to select this little opacity change that we've already animated. In this case, it's going from 0 to 100%. With both of those frames selected, we can copy them by going up to Edit and Copy, or Command-C if you're using your keyboard shortcuts. Let's move forward to 1 second and 5 keyframes. And with that selected, we can do Command-V or Paste to paste those on there as well. We can also do our trick of reversing out both of these because we want it to go from 100% down to 0. So let's go up to Animate, Keyframe Assistant, and again, choose Reverse, Time Reverse the keyframes. Now that it's starting to move, let's move forward to the end of that animation. So right at 1 second and 10 keyframes. And then let's change the position value to move it back over to 450. That will move it out of the way as it lowers the opacity. The other thing we can do is to select both of our position keyframes and do F9 to add easy ease to both of those. So now it'll come up and scroll to the left. Now, since we want the movement of it to be the same as what's on the screen, we can also select both of those keyframes just in the position value. Open up your graph editor so you can see it here, and then we can select this first Bezier and then drag it till the influence is 100%. So your graph should look like this, and it should also match the animation that's on the screen. Let me set this back to fit, so when I go back to play, it stays with it as well. Now we can reverse it out and do the opposite direction. Now, here's the challenge. The book doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what to do to go in the opposite direction, but let's see what we've learned and how we can apply it. First off, if we open the screens layer, you'll notice that the only thing we animated on the screen was the position. The timing started at 1 second and then it ended at 1 second and 10 frames. When it goes back, it starts at 2 seconds and then goes the opposite direction at 2 seconds and 10 frames. So if we wanted to animate this go in the opposite direction, essentially we're doing this same process just backwards. So the first thing we need to do is to see that we need to press the button. All of this pressing animation happens within these first few keyframes. So I want to select these first few keyframes, go up to Edit and Copy, or Command-C. We can move forward, and let's go ahead and edit those maybe at 1 second and 15 frames. With our current time indicator set at 1 second and 15 frames, you can go to Edit and paste it in there. Now, we can see that it pops up. The only issue with this is that our button is in the wrong position. So we need to move it back. Since we want this animation to start right here in the middle, let's move our current time indicator back to 1 second and 15 frames. And we're going to choose the position. Let's move the position over until it's nice back in the center. And if you remember, it's 640 is the position it's supposed to be set at. Now that it's set there, this is what it will look like. It moves back into position and comes up. From here, we can now animate everything backwards. So since the screen starts to move at 2 seconds, let's put our current time indicator at the 2-second mark. We need to add a keyframe at this position, so we're going to go back over to our position and click on the little gray triangle to give it a starting point. Move to the ending point. In this case, it'll be 2 seconds and 10 frames. And then let's move the position over so that it follows to right there. With that done, when we play it, you can see it moves over. But it is moving at a different rate. So let's choose both of these keyframes just in the position. We'll open up our graph editor, and we need the graph to be the reverse of this one. So we're going to click on the right handle and drag it to the right. Now when we turn off our graph and we go back to play, it flows with it nicely. The last thing that we need to do is to have the opacity also go down to 0 at this point too. So to do this with it selected, we can do the same opacity change from this. If you go back down to your timeline, this keyframe to this keyframe goes from 100% opacity down to 0% opacity. So I'm going to select both of those keyframes and go up to Edit and Copy. I want it to go down in opacity from this position to here. So we'll set my current time indicator at 2 seconds and then go up to Edit and Paste. Whoops, do that one more time. Copy and paste to have it lower the opacity as it goes across this way. With that done, let's back it all the way up and look at our animation. Very good. From here, you can save your project. Make sure the swipe composition is selected so we can go to Export and add it to our render queue. From here, you can keep it at its default settings. Just make sure you know where it's outputting to. Add your name to this file. We'll hit Save and then Render. Be sure to upload both the rendered movie file as well as your After Effects file to the class page.